Okay.
And let's see. Okay, well, hey, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it's always a treat to have Marc Cameron back with us. Today he's going to be talking about the brand new Arliss Cutter novel called Breakneck. I have copies right here. And I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase a copy. And also, if you have questions for Marc, go ahead and put them in, and Barbara will summon me back on screen towards the end of the hour, and I would be happy to ask any questions you might have. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Good evening, Marc. It's great to see you. This is that day when the temperature flips. It's now 100 in Phoenix, and it's probably nice in Alaska. And we both wish we were, well, I at least wish I were in Alaska for a little while.
This room is brutal, by the way.
I wish you were in
Barbara.
Alaska too. No, thanks for having me on. Oh, is it hot there in the room?
Up in our tower here, it's just, I'm getting blasted by the afternoon sun, but I've devised a kind of a ramshackle screen. So, and it seems to be working okay.
We need to get Patrick a blackout curtain for
There you go.
window
Yeah.
faces absolutely due west. And the air conditioning is so expensive. It's like heat in Alaska in the winter, that we don't run it all day. So by the time Patrick goes up to do this, or whoever's up there, it hasn't cooled off enough. It's actually
sure.
fine when we prepared for it, because we had a double book lunch with Jack Carr yesterday,
Right.
and the photographer. And the Tomahawk Manor and the whole thing was all upstairs, and it was really very pleasant. But it could cool down for 2 or 3 hours. So
Right.
there we are. We'll just have to stop being cheap about electricity.
Or else I could do it downstairs too. I could
There
just
you
use
go.
Well, that's really true, because quite honestly, the background is no
Yes.
more downstairs than it is where you are, which is sort of
with our new slick background, and then I'll disappear. We could just put that behind me downstairs, and it would be just as well.
yeah.
Anyway, you digress.
I know. Well, that's okay. We always digress.
That's right.
So what we're actually, speaking of tourism in Alaska, part of Breakneck, in point of fact, is an adventure into Alaska. But let me ask you first, Marc, because we're starting out in Russia. Were you at all inspired with this kind of opener, in the sense of Russians coming across the Bering Sea into Alaska by the two Russians who did actually flee Russia and the draft and land in Alaska?
Not that specific instance, but over the course of my career, we had, probably half a dozen times where I would be out in Bush, Alaska and Western Alaska, and some, citizen of a small village would come up to me and say, "Hey, there's an Ivan that we've seen over here, come across," and they would have been gone already. But that's not an uncommon thing, especially out towards, Diomede and, Little Diomede, and then St. Lawrence Island and those areas. So yeah, I was inspired by events like that, just not that particular one.
Well, no, because I don't think those guys actually came to kill anybody in your group.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And
That's true.
homicide. And I suppose, at this point, readers' expectation of anybody affiliated with the Bratva, which is the rest of the Russian mafia, there's going to be a lot of brutality and, worse involved whenever they seem to be involved. Do you think at this point that they are the most brutal of all the crime gangs?
I don't know. They're certainly among the most brutal, some of the worst that I've dealt with. The only dealings I've had with organized crime from Russia has been in human trafficking, and that obviously is super brutal. It's just a horrible situation with in fact, right when I moved to Alaska, we had some Russian dancers, underage girls that were here in Anchorage that were tied up with some of that, kind of on the fringes, and it was a very sad situation.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, so just to run that kind of thing, that kind of people as commodities, I consider that pretty brutal and worthy of an opponent of either Cutter or Lola or Jericho or whoever I happen to be writing about.
So what you do have here, well, actually your opening scene, which I think is wonderful about Bush, Alaska, because you have a family who go to a series of camps. And as I understand it, there's like moose camp and there's
Right.
berry camp, and now it's duck camp. So
Right.
why don't you explain? I mean, as you know, Dana lives in our house. Dana Stabenow, Alaska writer. She lives in our house several months of the year in the winter. And so I know a lot more about Bush, Alaska, maybe than the non-Alaskans, most of them. But for the benefit of those who know nothing about it, explain it.
Yeah. So until we arrived, until Europeans arrived, the Alaska natives, the indigenous people that were here, they were the people that drifted with the game, that went with the fish, that
Yeah.
went with caribou, that went after moose, and depending on where they lived. And so even though now they've put down roots, so to speak, for schools in these villages, they still, when the salmon run, they leave the villages and go out along in sort of age-old spots where each family will have, where they put up little tarps or tents or shacks, and they'll fish for their salmon in that area, or they'll all go out to their favorite berry picking grounds in the fall and they'll pick berries, or they'll hunt moose later in the fall, or caribou sometimes in the fall or winter. And so they go out as a family, and in my experience anyway, from my point of view, the seemingly healthiest families were the ones that went out and really practiced this subsistence lifestyle. And it's just a wonderful culture to observe and talk to, and I have some good friends that live out there, as I know Dana does as well, from living out on a fishing boat for much of her early life. So yeah, this is a very deep part of the culture, to be able to take your family out to fish camp or whale camp or seal camp, or depending on wherever part of Alaska you live.
So it must be seasonal.
Yeah, it just depends on the season. Early in the, duck season would be right after breakup or during breakup, in the spring, where they would go out, and where we in the lower 48, or our duck seasons are different because they're natives. They can go and hunt eider ducks in the spring for subsistence, and so duck camp would be a little bit earlier for them.
Why don't you describe breakup for people who don't know breakup?
Yeah, it's almost, unless you've seen it, it's almost indescribable. The rivers are frozen solid, and so breakup in Anchorage means a bunch of dog poop in the air because all the snow is melting, and there's all these exposed piles, and it's just cruddy, yucky brown snow. And when all the ice starts to break up, but out where I'm talking about, on the Yukon, the Kuskokwim, the Kobuk, these bigger rivers, the ice has been, it's been locked in all winter long. And sometimes that ice is, feet thick, 5, 6, 7 feet thick, where the sub-zero temperatures have just frozen it all the way, and they turn these rivers into highways, into ice roads. We see that on reality TV shows where they post signs, and there'll be stop signs and exit signs, and people driving their trucks up and down the Kuskokwim River or the Yukon River. And but when and even here up on you've probably been up and seen the Nenana River. They have the Nenana Ice Classic. I think that's actually the Tanana River, but it's in Nenana, Alaska, and they put a tripod out on it with a little sensor, I guess, and a line, and then people they bet on when the ice is going to break up, and that falls into the water, and whoever gets the closest to the time and date of breakup wins all the money. And it was a pretty decent haul this year. But so in these villages like this, they're built close to the water. When breakup happens, the big sheets of ice, some of them as big as a house, will pile up one behind another, and then the force, that hydraulic force of the water, just keeps pushing and pushing. And when finally it breaks, it's like a banshee. The ice screams and shrieks and just scours the shores, the banks of the rivers. And and it can be really devastating, but it happens every year. It's kind of a renewal, kind of a baptism, if you will, of the banks of the river, and strips them clean. And then within days, it's a river again instead of these teeth of ice. But it can be, as I said, very dangerous and very destructive and cause a lot of flooding. So it's a scary time, kind of a scary time.
It is. Well, I can see that it would be a scary time. And I grew up in Chicago, and March was our version of breakup, when it would be, mushy, as you say, it's slushy rather than mushy, and, often dirty. And it was a very unpleasant month, more or less, while you were transitioning from winter. But, when I'm trying to remember, but when I was in Fairbanks and we were on some of the big rivers, what's interesting about them in the summer, because I have never been there during breakup, is that the rivers are full of what they call glacial melt or glacial silt. And so the rivers are this kind of cloudy, the water is not clear and it's almost tangible, where you pick up a handful of it. So it's never, does it really ever run completely clear? Maybe by fall, or maybe never?
No, those rivers don't. They're the Tanana, the Kuskokwim, those rivers that are fed generally, mostly by glaciers, are full of silt and tannic acid from running through the peat moss and the muck and, muskeg. Some rivers are clear. There's some Eagle River, for instance, that I live in the town of Eagle River, and that's a glacial fed river, but by the time it gets out of the mountains to us, it's a very clear river, kind of tumbles down over the mountains. And so there's some beautiful rivers here. The Gulkana River in fact, it's very stark. We rafted that for most of the years that my kids were growing up, and it's a wild and scenic river in interior Alaska. And one fork of the river is full of tannic, tannin that running through the muskeg, so it's brown, kind of tea looking. And another fork is clear, coming out of a mountain lake there. And I can't remember the name of the lake, but a big lake. It takes several hours to get across in a boat. But as those two forks come together, you have the really cloudy and the really clear, and the difference in fishing is quite noticeable just by the clear water and the tannic kind of glacial water, but very different, which is kind of the neat thing about Alaska is we can write about, as a character, you can write about one part of Alaska that's what we would think of as Colorado, with these pristine mountain streams, and another part of Alaska where the rivers look like Texas, that are just, muddy creeks. So very interesting.
Well, you have some beautiful descriptions of Alaska, and Bush, Alaska in particular, in this book and in this opening chapter. And what we have is a family who take their kids, and they're going off to duck camp. And a little girl is sent off to, I'm trying to remember, is it to get water, whatever it is, down
Yeah, to get water.
And then suddenly she disappears. So that's the first incident that we're facing, is this young girl who is gone, and nobody finds a trace of her. And they try using hooks or whatever it is in the water to drag the river to see if they can find her. And, and Mark leaves us wondering at least for a while, whatever's happened to this little girl. But then we also then meet the evil Russians, and they are really evil Russians. And one of the Maxim Volkov, he's the kind of head Ratva guy. He has a son that when you first write about him, I don't know, it's so clear that he is just like his father, possibly more brutal. But anyway, we surely find out that Alex is that way. And you have Volkov having Alex, who's on a fishing boat, I think it is, suddenly having to change directions and get somewhere in a hurry. So those are the two things that start this book off. I thought
Right.
it was fascinating the way you did that, because really a thriller has to have an instigating incident, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, you have to have something that makes the good guy have to work hard, the hero, heroine, whatever, have to work hard, and these sort of instigating, and these are not, people ask me often, how did you come up with that? Were you inspired by that? And the Russians have a big, we have a big Russian population here. It's not uncommon for in the crabbing grounds where he's on a crabbing vessel, for Russians and American crabbing fleets to sort of come head to head. So, we're very close. We're very close, and I think I even mentioned in the book that Alaska and Russia are pretty much the same, except Russia has tigers. I mean, if you were to be plunked down in Siberia,
Yeah.
you could think you were in Alaska. It's got big brown bear and salmon, and I mean, they're just right across the sea. And then, with the exception of Siberian tigers.
It's only what, 3 or 4 miles across the Bering Strait?
Well, it's not very far, and up at Diomede, it's not very far at all, up at the very smallest portion of the strait, and a little Diomede.
Yeah, I
and
remember
Big Bend.
sailing past it when we
Yeah.
were going around Alaska and up to the Northwest Passage. And I remember, going through the Bering Sea, and they, the ship alerted us when we got to Diomede, so we could go and look and see what it was like. But, clearly there was a land bridge there that, for millennia probably, where people moved back and forth from Alaska to Siberia, and then the water must have cut through, just like the English Channel. I mean,
Oh,
England
yeah.
was part of the continent, and then eventually the water cut it off.
Yeah, exactly. And the people that live there, their cousins, Yupik Alaskans have cousins that are Chupik Eskimos. They appear in Alaska. I always have to say, here in Alaska, Yupik Inupiaq people call themselves Eskimos, where in Canada that would be considered maybe derogatory. So I'm very careful to only refer to people the way they want to be referred to. It's their business. And but the Yupik people will have cousins that are Chupik people and across the way in Russia, and they're related, and they know they're related. So there's this short geographical distance, but also just that distance in relatives and people makes it kind of ripe for a good setting, I think.
Well, we bought Alaska from Russia,
Yeah.
Russia was there. If you go to
That's true.
Sitka, as a matter of fact, there's a really well-preserved artifacts of Russian time. Was it 18th century? I think it is, maybe 19th.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a church, beautiful little church. There's a archbishop's house or bishop or whatever he was, and a number of buildings. So Sitka, I don't know where else in Alaska there are also remnants of Russia, but I'm sure there are besides Sitka.
Well, all over. Yeah. The most villages in Western Alaska have a Russian Orthodox church, a little onion dome church. That's one of the predominant religions in Western Alaska. Though some of them have like a Moravian religion, but Russian Orthodox is predominant. And then of course, like in the book, I mentioned the Old Believers down in Homer, that older Slavic group that were persecuted in Russia and ran first to China, then to Oregon, and then up here. So they've been here for several decades.
So what we have is the bad Russian Papa chief and his mysterious message to his son Alex on the crab boat that he needs to divert further south to rendezvous with his father, but you don't tell us why. So we're already thinking, what is going to be happening? And then we switch to Washington, D.C.
Well, and that's why we kind of, I think that's a sleight of hand maybe that we do as writers, is leave a question and then the next scene can say, oh, I wonder if this Supreme Court justice coming to Alaska could be the reason. So,
well, we have the justice. She's a widow, a fairly recent widow, and she has a daughter, and she and the daughter I think it's a judicial conference that the Supreme, as we'll call her, the Supreme is going to, but it's also a vacation opportunity for her and her daughter. Many of you watching this will possibly have traveled to Alaska because it's a very frequent vacation destination, at least in the Western United States. I'm trying to remember how many, I must have made a dozen trips and, by plane or ship and whatever up and down the coast. I can remember when Ketchikan looked like Cannery Row in Monterey. There were like 3 greasy spoons, and now it's talk about touristy.
Yeah.
And they've put in all sorts of tourist attractions, and you can take it down to the I'm trying to remember, what is that beautiful park south of Ketchikan? Something.
Saxman.
No, it's
islands.
islands.
Saxmanville. You're talking about going by boat?
Yeah. I'll think of it. What there actually is there's a really beautiful when volcanoes go extinct, they leave this beautiful sort of wall of
yeah.
you can fly over it by plane, or you can go to it by boat, and I keep wanting to say I can't, the Misty.
Well, they have like the
Misty Islands, isn't it?
Misty Fjords.
Yeah, that's it.
Misty
Right, the
Fjords.
Misty Fjords, and it has the cirque. Sorry, words are coming to me slowly. CARQE is the geological term for this rim of, I suppose it's probably granite, but whatever it is. And so it's really beautiful if you go by boat, you wind up going around in a circle when you get there. And if you fly over it, it's marvelous. But anyway, my point at the tourist industry, because I think the first time I went was in 1989. It hasn't been that long since tourism has totally transformed the entire Northwest Passage up to Alaska. And it's almost like a commuter thing for boats to go from either Seattle or Vancouver. And they used to go around Homer and all and wind up in Anchorage, but now they stop in Seward, and there's a bus that runs up there. So it's like a 7-day trip, up and down you go. And I don't know how many people actually venture any farther up into Alaska. And so the bush Alaska you're talking about is not going to be that familiar to tourists.
Yeah, it's way different. We kind of always joke here that, Anchorage is a great city because it's only an hour away from Alaska. You get on a plane, and, I've had people from when I was the chief here with the Marshal Service, I would frequently invite folks from DC out, and some people would say that's a boondoggle, but really we needed them to see what we were dealing with, because early on, for instance, they would give us 2-wheel drive vans for prisoner vans, and it just doesn't work up here. And so I invited them out. I invited a bunch of the assistant directors out, and then we flew them out to Bush, Alaska, to Bethel, to some of these villages that we talk about. I mean, up to Mountain Village, which is one of the ones I talk about in the book. Mountain Village is on the Yukon. Bethel is further south on the Kuskokwim rivers. But everything hinges around rivers out there. That's the highways. That in the wintertime, it's on snow machine or truck on the frozen river. In the summertime, it's via boat. And so we took them out to these places, and they were just astounded at what, there's villages, many villages, I'd say probably most of the villages still don't have working, half of them don't have working running water or toilets. And, they're using 5-gallon honey buckets for bathrooms. And this is today. Like if we were to go out there today, that's what we would find. There's no hotels. We would sleep in the schools. And so as a deputy marshal, that's the way we would travel. We'd travel by plane or boat, go sleep in schools, use the honey buckets. I mean, we're just living with the folks. And so that gave me a lot to draw from when it came to writing these stories. But as far as tourism goes, Utqiagvik, which is also mentioned in the book, which most people know as Barrow, but now it's called by the native name Utqiagvik. Mim goes to Utqiagvik in this, and that's a wonderful touristy, quote unquote, spot with facilities and a couple of hotels, several restaurants, but still very village-like. So you can see the culture and the people, that people want to talk to you about their culture. And as long as we don't go in and, with a, we know better than you kind of an attitude, then they're very welcoming and want to talk about their culture. And it's fun for me to write about it, even though I try to be very careful because I'm not Alaska Native, obviously, but I show my manuscripts to my friends that are. And the thing that I think the advice I get most often is just tell the truth, just be honest. Don't try to gloss it over, and don't try to make it worse than it is. So when we talk about missing Indigenous women, that's real. When we talk about sorts of abuse that go on, domestic violence, that's real. But then you also have to talk about the incredibly rich culture of subsistence and history and just ruggedness, that for people to eke out a living on the ice, it's amazing. It's just an amazing group of people.
And all the climate change deniers don't recognize how much those cultures are in fact in danger as the shelf ice is rapidly thinning out. The polar bears and seals are tragically affected by it, but so are these villages where they have for centuries learned how to live on the ice, and the ice is vanishing. So
yeah, they do. They have to go farther out to fish, to farther out to hunt walrus.
And even the fishing is changing, the water's warming or the overfishing. The salmon are no longer the same rich source that they once were. The crab industry we know about. I've been out all the way out to the end of the Aleutians, and the Greatest Catch, all that kind of stuff out there. There are now actually regular trips you can take across the Aleutians and then across Russia, I think down the Kamchatka Peninsula and down to Hokkaido and down to Tokyo. So again, you can also now cruise around Greenland. The first time I went to Greenland, you were lucky to land at the little southern tip in Kaportok. And now it's like, okay, you can cruise Greenland. So it's really happening, even if people don't want to believe it.
It's definitely changing.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's definitely changing. There's no doubt. And the people that live out there are seeing it firsthand.
They are. So we've talked about boats, and certainly Alaska is very heavily dependent on bush planes or bigger planes, but anyway, airplane travel. But in this one, you are now featuring a train. Now, I've been on the train in Skagway, which is an excursion train. Mm-hmm. And I have been on the train that goes from Fairbanks to Denali, which is again more of an excursion train that has, glass over dome cars and all the rest of it. But I've never heard of the Glacier Discovery train. So it's a fictional. No, where is it?
No, it's real. So it actually runs on the tracks that go between Anchorage to Seward. So through the mountains down the Kenai Peninsula.
Is that where it is?
But the Glacier Discovery itself only goes halfway. So it goes out of Anchorage along the Turnagain Arm, like you're going to Seward, and then to Whittier. And then they usually bop into Whittier, drop some people off to go on excursions or whatnot, and then come back out and continue on towards Seward. And then they get into the mountains to Spencer Glacier, which is just a gorgeous, gorgeous spot. And then a place beyond Spencer Glacier called Grandview. And that's just the best description it is. It's just these open vistas with mountains all around. And it's not uncommon to see bears there. And the train stops for about an hour. And you can eat lunch and hike around. And then it turns around and goes back to Anchorage. So it's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., just an out and back train. And it runs most days in the summer. It misses the Seward run because the ones that go all the way down to Seward. But it's a beautiful, and I think it's like a five car train. It's got a locomotive on one end, and then, as I describe in the book, a kind of a locomotive. It's like a passenger locomotive called the DMU, it's got a diesel unit in it, so it can go either way. So when it goes into Seward, the locomotives in the front, and then instead of turning around or doing switches, the DMU, which is like a big observation car with the upper floors, but then the engineers at the below you, then that takes the lead, and that drives all the way to Grandview. And then when they want to go home, the locomotive takes the lead again. So it's never having to do a turntable or switch. So, but it's a fascinating ride. It's a perfect ride for a visiting justice or judge. And I've protected half a dozen Supreme Court justices over the course of my career. Well, more than that, but half a dozen in Alaska. But we've never ridden a train like that. I thought, why don't we put her on a train? That'll be fun.
Wow, yeah. So, I mean, all kinds of possibilities for bad things happening.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
obviously.
tell me this. Is this a purpose-built? I mean, we have a train like that here in the Verde Valley, which is an old gauge train, mining train. It has exactly the same thing. It doesn't have a turntable. You catch it up near Cottonwood, and it goes all the way up to an old ghost town past the Red Rocks, and then it just goes back. There's no, I think, I'm trying to remember whether the engine, it may be that the engine goes on a little track from the front, to the reverse, but there's no turntable. And there's, a more famous one in Colorado, an old mining train, the Silverton. But is this one you're talking about? Is it an old track repurposed, or was it built specifically to be a tourist train?
No, it's the main train line down to Seward. So this is just the train itself. I'm not sure that they don't run that all the way to Seward at a different time, or different days. So it's the same. If you were to look at the locomotive, the engine,
Yeah.
you might see that on the train going north to Denali in the winter. My wife and I have ridden. So for research, we rode I can't really call it, not the Polar Express, but something, Arctic Express, Denali Express, but it goes from Anchorage to Fairbanks all year long.
Right. That was the one I've been on.
Yeah, and it goes, Talkeetna and then Denali Village and then continues on. So we rode up one day, spent the night, rode back the next day, and it was bitter cold. Actually, when my wife and I first went, it was during COVID, and it was fall, but it was chilly. Stuff was starting to freeze up. The swans were migrating. It was a beautiful time of year. And then I went myself up during the middle of winter just to chat mainly to talk to the people on the train about because the Glacier Discovery doesn't run during the winter, and I really needed to write this book. So I talked to the porters and quizzed them about what that portion was like. And I'd flown over Spencer Glacier, and I'd hired a bush pilot to fly me over to see what it was like from the air, and because the tracks were not being used in the winter, it gets just too snowy back in there. And then right before I finished up the book, so I turned it in the summer, I was able to, my wife and I took the Glacier Discovery train out and were able to actually, it was I turned in the book, but I hadn't done the final edits yet. So we were able to kind of tweak some things around and see what it was really like. And I think it really helped, but it's a wonderful trip. Anybody that comes to Alaska, you just get on the Alaska Railroad site and just look at Glacier Discovery, and it's well worth it. I mean, it's relaxing. Yeah. There's not a bad view on the train. And it's, they have the DMU, so that double decker, and then another car, and then it's a baggage car, because they have a baggage car as it is in the book, because they take rafters out, and it's a whistle stop, so they can go out and drop off rafters, and they go out, and some people stay in camp for a day or two. Other ones raft at the glacier, in the base of the glacier, and then when the train comes back a few hours later, they're chilly and tired and ready to get back on and go to Anchorage. But it's a great day trip and very relaxing.
Well, I'm certain, I can't believe that all the times I've been there, I've never done, I have driven from Seward to Alaska, and Seward to Homer and all, and there's what is it, Portage Glacier down?
Yeah.
I've been there several times, and the glacier, may I say, the first time I went, the glacier was right down there by the road, and the last time I was there, the glacier was almost out of sight.
Yeah,
It's like
it's
Glacier
all
Bay.
it's
The first time I went to Glacier Bay, there were actual glaciers, and now, just like Glacier National Park in Montana, the glaciers have almost disappeared.
yeah, it's receding. The Portage Glacier is all the way around the point now. It used to be
Right.
by that big visitor center that's
Yeah.
there. You can still see some bergy bits and stuff. And driving down to Seward, you might have been to Exit Glacier. There's a place where you, right before you get in the city limits of Seward, you can turn and drive out. I don't know, it's like 5, 6, 7 miles to Exit Glacier. And that's interesting because they have signposts, this is where the glacier was in 1950.
Right.
This is where it was in 70. And when we first moved here, we've been here 25 years and it's moved quite a bit in the time we've lived here. In fact, I was going to say, we've lived here 25 years and I hadn't ridden the Grandview Glacier Discovery Train until last year either. I mean, it's not something I really paid attention to, quote unquote sightseeing train. I like the idea of train travel. My wife and I travel Amtrak and all that. So the traveling up to Fairbanks, that was interesting. But once I discovered and actually, when I originally conceived this book, it was going to happen on that train going to Denali with that river, the Nenana River off to the side and all of that. And when I chatted with the porters and the folks on the train, they said, "Oh no, we got a good remote train for you." And they're the ones that told me about the Glacier Discovery. And so that's one of those unknown unknowns that I talk about. I go on research trips to ask a bunch of questions. And then in asking those questions, I found out stuff I didn't even know to ask. And that's what led me to the Glacier Discovery.
Right. Well, it's perfect for your book. I can't see that the one that goes to Fairbanks would work. For one thing, it's too big and there are too many people involved.
Exactly.
And that's not going to work. But anyway, it's pretty well, it tells you right up front in the book that bad things are going to happen on the Glacier Discovery train. And so you've got these various things coming together, in play. You've got the little girl who's missing. You've got the Russian guys converging, father and son, but also from Russia converging. How easy is it for them to do that? I mean, I assume is there any kind of passport control or anything where the guy's on the crab boat? Does he have to have some kind of paperwork to actually land in Alaska?
Well, there should be, but in reality, there's so much coastline that it's not really, there are ways to get in. It's porous, like any border, and especially a maritime border like that. And then, of course, the way Alex comes in, the middle of the night, he's kind of snuck in. So, yeah, it's definitely doable. I think that's one of the things in writing a book like this, you have to answer that question to the reader that, okay, this is not normal, but this is the way this particular character is going to get around the passport control or customs or whatever.
Well, it just has to be plausible. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
But it is, I think thriller readers will forgive a lot because, it's really the action and so forth.
Right.
But still, I think there needs to be a certain amount of plausibility that people could actually do this stuff.
Oh, yeah. And it happens.
And you don't have superhero. I mean, Arliss Cutter is a huge guy. He's formidable. He's an Iron Man, all the rest of it, but he's not like some Marvel, character where he's got superpowers. And therefore, whatever he's going to be facing has to be something that you can imagine he could face. He's not going to come in and escape and, magically go Shazam and fix everything.
Well, I hope that comes across. I'm glad to hear you say that. I always want my characters to be human. I've been fortunate enough to work with some just amazing people that are super smart, that speak many languages, that are Olympic class athletes, but they still get hurt. They still twist a knee. They still, they still have trauma. And I think it's important for us to remember that, when somebody gets shot in the belly, they're not up, fighting bad guys the next day. There is a time that they have to heal. And I think part of what I've always wanted to show with my Jericho Quinn books, and then of course with the Jack Ryan books and Tom Clancy's characters, and then now these, is that there is a tremendous physical cost that comes with this kind of lifestyle, and jumping on trains or off trains, even if you're just walking slowly on a train, it's hugely dangerous. And I had a little incident on a train early in my career, and it was just a flatbed, a car, and that was still super dangerous. And I was stupid for doing what I did, but I was young and, and immortal like you are when you're 24, 25-year-old copper. So I think a lot of officers, my sons included, she's not an officer, but my daughter included, who rides motorcycles, when you're a certain age, you feel pretty impervious to the laws of nature. And sometimes one of the things that I really want to point out with Arliss, there's a flashback in this book that goes back to when he's quite young. And rather than being a giant all his life, he was pretty scrawny as a kid. But I wanted to show that even as a scrawny kid, he still had the same ethos. He still had the same desire to stomp bullies. He didn't win all the time, but that didn't matter. So it's not just because he's a giant guy that's, tough and able to take care of business now that he does this. He's done it his whole life. He's done it even when he probably was going to get his tail kicked. And I think that's what really informs Arliss's character, what he's really like.
Well, you have some other characters who are pretty tough and up in the bush looking for the little girl, should they ever be able to find her. There's a really interesting character who is who's been there for a very long time and has adapted to living entirely rough, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
I really liked him.
I do too.
Is he likely to reappear? Because I thought he
Oh
was
yeah,
great.
yeah, I think so. You remember, I'm sure you read Carl Hiaasen books, and
Yeah.
in Carl Hiaasen's books, he has that ex-governor who, kind of the one-eyed governor that's crazy, that ties himself to a bridge during a hurricane at one, and he reappears in several of the books. And I think that's cool. I mean, I'm a big Carl Hiaasen fan anyway, but to have these quirky characters that populate quirky but not crazy, but good, bad, whatever. And so Tom Walker, I think is his name. That was 2 books ago that I wrote Breakneck. I think his name's Walker, Captain Walker. He's the kind of character that I could see coming back again and crossing paths, just like Bertie Pingyuk, the native girl, the native lady, the principal of the school in Stone Cross. She's mentioned in this book, or 2 books ago. Even though she's not in the book, she gave Arliss admittance, so she gets mentioned. She will definitely cross paths with Arliss again, as will Tom. Alaska's a big state, but a small population, and so we run across people all the time. And I mean, I see people now. I've been retired 11 years, and 2 of the guys that I worked with for years stopped by a book signing the other day. And so, it's just, you see people a lot that you maybe, we play a game, my wife and I, when we get to the airport in Seattle, and we're all, converging on Alaskan with who's going to see the first person that we know. And it might be our friend, the lieutenant governor. It might be the former, chief of police in Seward, or, whatever. But it's a small area. And so Arliss, Lola, they're all going to run across these cool characters again.
They're very useful too, I
Yeah.
mean, they're useful for your story, and they can sometimes do things that Arliss can't do. But I'm glad you mentioned Lola, because we haven't really talked about Lola, but Lola has a really big part to play in this book, and she is super tough as well.
Yeah, she's one of my favorites. My wife and I go to the Cook Islands most years during the winter to spend a couple of months. And in fact, I'd say most of the Tom Clancy's that I've written the biggest part of them were written on the island of Rarotonga, which is between Tahiti and Fiji. And so it's the indigenous population of Rarotonga are Cook Island Maori people, so Polynesian people, very strong, very very opinionated, just really wonderful, wonderful people. And the women there, we spend a couple of months there, and I get to know a lot of people. And I think, man, I need a very strong female counterpart for Arliss. And we have actually a very large Polynesian population in Alaska. I'm not sure why. I think fishing maybe drew them here in the beginning, but a lot of the police officers that work with my son are Polynesian, and it's cool. I mean, we have a very diverse population anyway, different ethnicities and cultures, and I like that. I like my kids growing up in that. But I just fell in love with the Maori, the Cook Island Maori culture, and that's where Lola Tariki comes from. And so it's very plausible to have a Polynesian deputy marshal based in Anchorage, Alaska.
There actually is. As a matter of fact, I'm trying, Margaret Mizushima, who writes a book set in Colorado, although she's moving to the Northwest, so I'm not sure if she's going to continue it. I think she is, but she has a Maori member of the police department there in the mountains of Colorado. So,
yeah.
I mean, I love New Zealand. I haven't spent any time in the Cook Islands, but I have been last year. We went to French Polynesia, which is basically Hawaii with 200,000 instead of 10 million visitors, and it's French. So the language, it's
a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and it's just below the equators, and so you don't cross the date line. It's really not that. I'm trying to remember. It's not that long a flight from San Francisco. And I loved it. And I thought of all the times I've been to Hawaii when I could actually have gone to French Polynesia. And I like Hawaii, but I think I could have mixed it up a little more. But we've also been to New Zealand several times. What we haven't done is that bit with Tahiti. And I would like to do that. But anyway, Lola plays a major role in the book. And I don't think we should tell you any more other than you can imagine that we've talked about the Russians and the crab boats and moving south. And we have talked about the Supreme Court judge and her daughter moving, coming up to Alaska for a conference. And we've talked about the excursion train. And so all of the stuff coalesces together. And I have to say, Mark, I thought your train scenes were propulsive. They were really well written and pretty scary.
Thank you. No, I enjoyed going over the possibilities with my friends that work work for the railroad, and then using some of my experiences, like I said, when I was a dumb young officer just trying to ride on a flatbed car. But yeah, so I want to make it realistic, because so many movies and thriller movies have people running across the top of a train car, and you would just die. That's all there is to it. You
would. And, there are tunnels.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Not all open track. There are tunnels.
Yeah. And we talk about that in the book. So,
yes, absolutely. So, it may put you off writing on an excursion train once you read this. But anyway, it's a terrific book. I really enjoyed it very much. And I'm only sorry that you weren't here to discuss it, but I'm glad we had this opportunity.
We'll make it happen next time. We will definitely. I'll do it myself.
Well, we're going to do it one way or another. I have one more question to ask you, which is, there's going to be a change in the Jack Ryan Sr. Are you able to talk about that?
Yes, I like Mark Graney, 7 is enough and I'm writing my last one. And I actually thought that Red Winter would be my last one, but Tom and I chatted, and I agreed to write one more. And it's been a great honor. It's been an incredible honor. It's not something I sought out. I mean, Mark very kindly recommended me to Tom Colgan and the estate. And so they called my agent and called me up and surprised me. And so it's been 7 years of just very enjoyable work, but it's also I never have enough time to do my own stuff. And, I was talking to Tom Colgan about this just a few days ago, the editor of the Clancy books. And Tom Clancy took a year to write each book, and we're doing it in 6 or 7 months and writing one of our own. And I don't want to stop writing my own. And so it's just at some point, as Mark Graney decided, it's the right time to focus on my own stuff. And I get 2 or 3 emails a day from readers that really, really, really want another Jericho Quinn. And I have some plotted out. And so I'll be able to not necessarily write 2 books a year, but maybe 3 books every 2 years, and still do the Cutters, and then the very talented Andrews and Wilson are taking over. And
they are. I've had a pleasure of already Zooming with them, and they're going to join me next week to talk to Don Bentley. And so we'll be discussing it. And then Don, as you know, Kyle Mills made the same decision you've made. He is putting the Vince Flynn torch into Don's hands so that he can write his own. And, I can certainly understand if you're writing in somebody else's universe, as well as your own, that at some point, maybe you've said all that you have the space to say, unless you really don't want to write anything other than that anymore, because they are. I remember Clive talking to me years ago after Trojan Odyssey, and he said to me, I just can't do this all by myself anymore. The books are so big, there's so much research, and the Clancys are the same. You can't just spin them off.
Oh yeah, and there's to do them right. And that's one of the things that Andrews and Wilson are going to do very well, because they have that military background. I don't have a military background, and so my Clancys, my Jack Ryans have been very espionage heavy, very Secret Service heavy, FBI heavy, with the military. Obviously, it's a Tom Clancy, a military several set pieces, but I'm sure that's gonna tweak a little bit, sort of steer back towards the military a little more. Where mine were more like Sum of All Fears and Without Remorse and Cardinal of the Kremlin kind of Clancy books.
That's okay. It's a big universe. And I really enjoyed your Jack Ryan Senior books. We've talked about them together on Zoom, and they've, and you've been here for them, and I think they're great. The other advantage that Brian and Jeffrey have is there are 2 of them, which means that, they can share the workload some. But anyway, I'm glad that you've made a decision you're happy with. And
oh yeah, no, I have plenty to do, and at some point you have to bet on yourself, and this is the right time to do it. So well,
that's true.
But it was a great experience. I hope people know that it was a great honor, and I'm happy to have done it.
I'm sure that they do. And, the bottom line is for every book you write, there's a book you didn't write.
That's true.
Time is our most precious commodity. And when we are using it up, we don't, especially as we're getting more senior, we don't have as much time to spare for all of it as we would like. Patrick, come and join us. And let us know if there are any questions.
Will do. Mark, there's actually a really good question. Not that there aren't always good questions, sorry, folks. But a unique question. Joni would like to know, she says, hey, Mark, it would be assumed that your knowledge of law enforcement, rules and regs would be helpful in writing your novels, but has your knowledge of the real world ever been detrimental?
I think sometimes that is a really good question. And I think I always joke that I've got scars on my ankles from my wife kicking me under the table when I tell a war story at church, at some social or something. And she'll say, these are nice people. Stop telling that story that way. And I think sometimes I have to back off a little bit from making things too lurid's probably not the right word, but too visceral, because I don't want to write some people like that kind of stuff. I don't want mine to come across as a Hannibal Lecter book, or these are certainly not cozies, and I am going to tell the real thing. But sometimes I straddle a line where, I've seen sea lice on dead bodies. I've found dead bodies underwater when I was a diver. So I know what that stuff looks like. I like to keep my books fairly PG-13 and like a Cussler book, that kind of a audience, and maybe knowing some of the reality, I have to tone it down a little bit, but I don't know. There's plenty of people. I got a nasty email the other day from somebody because I used the word snot, and they were really upset. And I said, well, sorry, I don't know what to say.
Snot?
Snot the reader was just very, very angry with me. So
It's best not to engage, Mark, when you get emails like that.
Oh, I didn't. I don't read my reviews, but I do read my emails. But my response to that one was just a delete button. I don't. There's no. But my point is, people are going to be mad about something.
Yep, we get them in customer service. It took me a while to get the bill, especially to say, the only answer to this is just delete.
Exactly that.
Right. Robin would like to know, she dialed into your comment about plotted out with your upcoming work. She said, so you're a plotter versus a pantser. Is that true? Much. And she says, do you do pen and paper or only on the computer do you write?
No, I use Blackwing pencils, fountain pen, and piles of, it would upset the apple cart if I tried to pick up my notepads, but probably for each book, I'll do at least 5 or 6 notepads of notes and free writing. And and I was joking not even joking. I accused Don Bentley of lying when he says he's a pantser. I think he's just smarter than me, and he just plots it out all in his head, and he's able to remember it. I have to write it down on
he's
paper.
A sniper. Let's remember this. He's a helicopter pilot and a sniper. And I think you're right. And you know what else Don Bentley is? He's a fabulous interviewer.
Oh, he's great. He's great. I just think he's so smart that he's able to envision the plot in his head.
Yeah.
Where I really have to write it down, where he can. In fact, I was joking with Nick Petrie about the same thing, because he says he's a pantser as well. And he's another one that I just think, yeah, you say that, but you're just smarter than me. You've got it all plotted, but I have to write it down. I use big Post-it notes. I'm looking at a whiteboard now where I write my scenes out so I can glance up, mainly, especially with the Clancy's, for timelines. I don't want to have it 11 p.m. in DC at the same time as it's 11 p.m. in Tokyo,
Yeah, you do have to pay attention to stuff like that for sure.
Yeah. Let's see, any other questions here? You've answered this. Somebody was asking about, since your decision to leave the Clancy world, any thoughts of more Jericho Quinn? Have you already said yay or nay on that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I have a couple plotted, and I have a contract for another Jericho and another Jericho novella, so full length and a novella. So, writers are always one contract from being unemployed. And right now I have another Jericho and another Cutter. So I got another year's worth of work in me.
Trying to think of it as that, you have endless opportunities to, whether you have a contract or not, something. Well, I think that, stuff will come along And maybe it's
Oh,
an
yeah.
opportunity to do something different if you
Oh,
run.
no, absolutely. We're renegotiating now, and the books are selling well enough that I don't worry about that at all. We have some really cool stuff on the horizon that hopefully I'll be able to announce soon. I am in such a fortunate place right now that
That's wonderful. When is your last Clancy coming out, in December?
yeah, the end of November. I turned it into Tom this coming week, and then we'll go back and forth, and he'll tell me what he wants me to change and whatnot, and
Right.
they get on it pretty quick. But yeah, it'll come out in December, and then the next Cutter will come out April, the end of a year from.
Either one
a
of
year from
those
now.
is an excellent time to visit Scottsdale.
I agree. We'll
We're
see
gonna
what
work this out.
we'll see what Putnam does with the last Clancy, and then one way or another, I'll make it down either for that or the next Cutter. We already have a title. The cover's done of the next Cutter, so it'll be fun.
Great.
And a lot of the mysteries that I leave open in this will conclude in Cutter 6.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting to know, because yes, there are some open-ended questions, but I bring them up since there are no answers and decide I don't want to,
Right. No
make it one
spoilers.
too much here while we're having
Right,
this
exactly.
conversation. Anything
Yeah.
else, Patrick?
No, let me just jump over to YouTube real quick here. No, just people chiming in saying looking forward to the new books and they're excited about what you're doing. But no other questions really.
Okay.
Well, any
Cool.
TV
Thanks.
stuff? Maybe TV or movie stuff that we
We
don't.
probably can't talk about it.
Oh, it's
If
okay.
if
Okay.
there's a writer's strike right now, so I can't talk about it. But like I say, I've got a lot of cool stuff on the horizon, so we'll hopefully be able to talk about things before too long.
Well, let me finish up by saying that even though this is a thriller with, we've already told you various plot elements and so forth, this is a great travel log. This book is a fabulous travel log to Alaska, not just the cruise ship, not even the cruise ship Alaska, but honestly, if you've never been there, Marc's descriptions, I think, will interest you in making a trip there at some point. I've been there many times, as we've already said, and I've really enjoyed it. But even so, this is a new experience for me, what you've been writing about. So, and now we know about the train, which,
Yeah, thank you.
how about
Thank
that?
you.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, highly recommended. Breakneck. So thank you very much, Marc. Always a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good
Pleasure.
night.